The War of 1812 was the first war that was declared by Congress under the new Constitution, under the system. It was the first test of national unity. A lot of Americans, I don't think, realize that. They think of it as Second War of Independence, so it makes it seem as if it creates the impression that the British were about to invade and try to regain their colonies, but that was not part of their script. September 10th, 1813 was the date of the Battle of Lake Erie, and it was the day the British came out to attempt to break through an American blockade. The battle was very hard fought. It kind of spanned a large part of the day, although most of that was maneuvering into position. The British were sighted at dawn about 10 miles away. The wind was very light out of the southwest. The British had the weather gauge. They could keep on course and maintain an upwind position. Perry was forced to beat to weather to get out of his anchorage. By 10 in the morning, he was 4 hours into this, and they were not able to get clear of Rattlesnake Island, of the island that encloses the harbor at Put-in-Bay. The wind shifted 90 degrees at that moment. It went flat for a few minutes, so when it came back, he had the wind from the southeast, and now it's in the British right in their face, and it's at his back, and he could sail out to meet them. Perry's closing in at maybe 2.5, 3 knots. The American squadron is gradually overtaking the British squadron. And after about an hour and a half of this tense silence of all the preparations have been made, and now they're just waiting and waiting, they get in range. The British initially have an advantage in range because they have some, the Detroit, their largest ship, is armed primarily with long guns. So Perry starts taking some hits. He decides to turn right for the British line and close in, running downwind towards them. And this exposes his ships to raking fire. But Perry figured that if he could endure this for maybe 20 minutes, half hour at the most, he could get in there. And once he closed in, he would have such fire superiority that he would be able to defeat them. It didn't quite work out that way because Jesse Duncan Elliott, his second in command, decided to keep the Niagara back. And that once Perry got in close to the British and closed the range, the position of all the ships stayed static for the next 2 hours. If Niagara had closed in, I believe the battle would have been over in half the time with half our casualties. As it was, the British ships could concentrate on the Lawrence because Niagara was out of range and some of the other vessels were still so far back. So I think Perry ended up in this disadvantageous position, so even though he has a stronger squadron, because he's jumped in with both feet and because he wasn't supported by a second command in doing so, he ends up where the British can have fire superiority on him in that little space of a quarter mile. And then the Lawrence crew became decimated. Over the next couple of hours, they showed an amazing degree of courage and determination. And on the Lawrence, they stick it out as the casualty rate gets up to about 75%. Every gun has been knocked off its carriage on the starboard side. Every line has been shot away in the running rigging. Perry cannot maneuver. He cannot fight. And he's stuck. He's helpless. Ship is a shattered wreck. The wounded below on the berth deck have blood dripping on them through the seams of the planking. And he's facing an inevitable surrender. But just then, the wind comes back, and it fills in this afternoon breeze, and it fills in fairly strong from the southeast again. It blows the smoke clear, the ships start moving. The British line moves faster because their ships are less shot up. They respond to this wind and go forward. The Lawrence, in relative terms, drops back because her sails are more shot up. And then as the smoke clears and the British line starts moving away and the range starts opening a little, Perry looks around and he realizes the Niagara is sailing for the head of the line, putting on more sail, setting sails, and starting to speed up. He doesn't know what Elliott's going to do, but he knows Elliott's been pretty useless so far. Perry determines to jump in a boat. He still has towing alongside. He takes 4 men, he takes his flag, he jumps in this cutter, and has himself rowed over to the Niagara. They have to row like hell because the Niagara is sailing a pretty good clip, and because the British have shifted fire to the boat, and everybody in the boat gets soaked from the splash of nearby missiles. Perry gets over to the Niagara, gets on board. We don't know what gets said between him and Elliott, but Elliott does take the boat, the pair that brought Perry, and volunteer to take that boat and go back and round up the lagging gunboats, the smaller vessels that were been strung out behind. Perry then takes the Niagara, orders even more sails set, and orders another downwind turn, and this time he's going to cut the British line. He's going to go in front of the Detroit so he can rake her. And at this time, the officer on the Detroit is not the captain. The captain is down wounded. But the junior officer sees what's happening. He sees the Niagara starting to sail down towards him, and he tries to maneuver turn the ship downwind to keep his broadside bearing to prevent from being raked. And when he does so, the Queen Charlotte, which was their second largest vessel and had been pounding on the Lawrence together with the Detroit, the Queen Charlotte comes up, and she's basically out of control because so much of her running rigging lines have been shot away, and they ram the Detroit. The two ships get stuck together with the Queen Charlotte's bowsprit and the mizzen shrouds of the Detroit. And this makes them helpless to maneuver. And right at this moment, the Niagara sails across their bow, and at a range of half pistol shot, which is basically the length of the jib boom. So just right on top of them, sails in and pours in broadsides port and starboard. To port, she fires on the schooner Lady Prevost. To starboard, she fires at the Detroit and the Queen Charlotte. And this is as the guns bear as they sail across the bow, one after another, 10 down the line. They fire, and probably in the space of about 10 seconds or less, over 600 pounds of hot metal go roaring down the British deck because the guns have been double shotted. They have a bag of grape, which is large iron balls, on top of the Bain cannonball, the 32-pounder. And so this is absolutely devastating. The British take probably at least half their casualties for the whole battle in this one broadside. And as soon as Niagara crosses to the lee side downwind, they throw the sails aback to stop the ship. And then they rapidly reload and they fire another broadside. And then at this point, the British it's devastating casualties they're taking. They can't respond anymore. They surrender. Their flags have been nailed to the mast in anticipation of not surrendering. But in the event they had to, and so they ended up waving a tablecloth on a pike, a white cloth, and their surrender was accepted. The book is intended as an overview. The first chapter is really an overview of the entire war. It's a very concise book. It's from a sailor's point of view. The one thing I have to offer that other historians generally don't is I have the seaman's experience of sailing the type of vessel for a long time and knowing and thinking about how that affected the action, or in the reports of the battle, the first-hand reports, when somebody mentions something about wind or the direction, I can know we'll also know what the consequences of that are. I mean, I can look at it as how will this affect this action further. And that's what my contribution is writing about it from a seaman's point of view, to fill in that gap in understanding of what the options of the commanders were, what couldn't they do, what they could do, and that helps analyze their choices a little better.